Sometimes a single image can define an entire era. For a generation, it was this one, a young American woman on the streets of Paris with a pixie haircut that launched 1,000 imitations, selling the New York Herald Tribune. She was impossibly chic, utterly modern, the very picture of freedom. Her name was Jean Seberg, and she was the face of the French New Wave, a symbol of youthful rebellion and sophisticated cool. She was an idea, a fantasy of a life lived without compromise. But there is another image, a much darker one, an image that was never meant to be seen. This one isn't a film clip, it's a file, a thick manila folder in a cold gray government office stamped with the letters FBI. Inside are memos filled with the chillingly bureaucratic language of cruelty, surveillance logs documenting her every move, and a meticulously crafted plan. A plan to neutralize her, to cheapen her image, to exploit her deepest vulnerabilities, and turn her life into a ruin. A plan that would birth a malicious lie, steal her peace of mind, and chase her to her grave. How does a beloved movie star, an American girl from the cornfields of Iowa, become a target of her own government? How does a life that seemed so full of light, so blessed with talent and beauty, end in such profound and lonely darkness? This isn't just a story about Hollywood glamour or Parisian style. It's a story about the devastating cost of a conscience, a story of what happens when a powerful secret organization decides you are an enemy of the state, not for what you've done, but for what you believe. This is the story of Jean Seberg, the actress the FBI destroyed. Our story begins not in Paris, but in a place about as far from it in spirit as you can imagine, Marshalltown, Iowa. In the 1940s and 50s, this was the absolute heart of wholesome post-war America. Life revolved around church, school, and family. Jean's father was the local pharmacist, a respected pillar of the community. Hers was a stable Lutheran upbringing grounded in the quiet conservative values of the Midwest. She was the quintessential all-American girl, pretty, popular, active in the drama club, and dreaming, as so many did, of a world beyond the horizon of the cornfields. But even then, there was something different about Jean, a sensitivity, a questioning nature. She was deeply affected by the book Cry, The Beloved Country, Alan Paton's novel about racial injustice in South Africa. At 14, she wrote a letter to the NNAACP, enclosing a small donation, an early sign of the empathy that would later define and endanger her. She was drawn to stories of outsiders, of saints and rebels. She possessed a quiet ambition that was larger than Marshalltown could contain. Her ticket out was the stuff of Hollywood legend. In 1956, the formidable Austrian-born director Otto Preminger, a man known as much for his monocle and volcanic temper as for his films, launched a massive nationwide talent search. It was a publicity stunt of epic proportions. He was looking for a complete unknown to play Joan of Arc in his lavish production of St. Joan. He screened over 18,000 hopefuls, from professional actresses to soda fountain clerks. Out of all of them, he chose 17-year-old Jean Seberg. It was a Cinderella story broadcast to the entire nation, an Iowa farm girl plucked from obscurity to portray a French saint, but the fairy tale quickly curdled into a gothic nightmare. Preminger was a notorious tyrant on set, a master of psychological manipulation who believed that to get a great performance, you had to break an actor down. With the inexperienced and vulnerable Jean, he went further. He seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in her torment, perhaps believing that to play a martyr, she must truly suffer. He forbade other cast and crew members from speaking to her, isolating her completely. He would scream at her for the smallest infractions in front of hundreds of extras, reducing her to tears. He was, in essence, conducting a psychological experiment on a teenager, all while the cameras rolled. The torment became terrifyingly literal during the filming of the climax, the burning at the stake. Preminger, obsessed with realism, insisted on using real flames. A special effects rig was designed to protect Jean, but it malfunctioned. The fire surged, engulfing her. Strapped to the stake, she screamed in genuine terror as her costume caught fire, leaving her with permanent scars on her abdomen. The studio's publicity department, in a moment of stunning callousness, used the incident to their advantage. The film's tagline was, "The star who was discovered in the flame, and the picture that will be a fire in your memory." For Jean, the words were a literal painful truth. She had been discovered in the flame, and she had been burned. St. Joan was a critical and commercial disaster. Critics savaged her performance, calling her a monotonous lightweight. Her next film with Preminger, the much more stylish Bonjour Tristesse, was filmed on the sun-drenched French Riviera. It was a story of teenage angst and moral ambiguity, and in it, you can see the first glimmers of the chic, modern icon she would become. But the experience was no less painful. The director's cruelty continued unabated. Hollywood was ready to write her off as Preminger's folly, a footnote in cinematic history. Bruised and disillusioned by her trial by fire in Hollywood, Jean could have retreated back to the safety of Iowa. Instead, she did something that would change her life and cinematic history forever. She stayed in France, a country that was about to fall in love with her. Paris in the late 1950s was a city on the verge of a cultural explosion. On the left bank, in smoky cafes and basement jazz clubs, a group of young, ferociously intelligent film critics were plotting a revolution. They were tired of the polished, literary, studio-bound French films of the old guard. They wanted to make movies that felt like life, that captured the energy and anxiety of the modern world. They were François Truffaut, Claude Chabrol, Éric Rohmer, and a pugnacious cigar-chewing firebrand named Jean-Luc Godard. This was the birth of La Nouvelle Vague, the French New Wave. Godard saw in Jean Seberg something no one else had. He saw that her Americanness, her slight awkwardness that Hollywood had derided, was actually her greatest asset. It was authentic. It was real. He cast her in his 1960 debut feature, A Bout de Souffle, or Breathless. She played Patricia Franchini, an American student in Paris selling the New York Herald Tribune on the Champs-Élysées, who falls for a charming, amoral French gangster on the run, played by the charismatic Jean-Paul Belmondo. The film was a cultural atom bomb. Shot on the streets with a handheld camera filled with jump cuts and casual philosophical musings, it broke every rule. And Jean was its heart. With her iconic pixie haircut, striped Breton shirt, and that unforgettable cry of New York Herald Tribune, she became an instant, indelible icon. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a mood. She embodied a new, liberated femininity, independent, intelligent, and impossibly cool. The very qualities that made her an awkward fit in Hollywood made her the perfect muse for modern European cinema. She had found her artistic home, and soon her personal one as well. In Paris, she was embraced by a circle of intellectuals and artists. And it was here she met the man who would become the great, complicated love of her life, Romain Gary. Gary was a figure who seemed to have stepped from the pages of a grand historical novel. Born Roman Kosciuszko in Lithuania to Jewish parents, he had immigrated to France, become a decorated war hero flying for the Free French forces under Charles de Gaulle, and then a celebrated novelist who won France's most prestigious literary prize, the Prix Goncourt. He was also a diplomat, a filmmaker, and a man 24 years her senior, possessed of a towering intellect and a deep, world-weary cynicism. Their relationship was a whirlwind of passion, intellect, and profound, if unconventional, understanding. They married and had a son, Alexandra Diego Gary. Theirs was a famously open marriage, a pact between two restless, brilliant souls who refused to be bound by convention. Gary understood Jean's fragility and her strength. He became her protector, her mentor, and her most ardent champion. For a time, it seemed she had finally found a measure of peace. She had a thriving international career, a family, and a life of genuine intellectual and artistic excitement. But while Jean was living this glamorous European life, her home country was in flames. The late 1960s in America were a time of deep and violent schism. The civil rights movement, the war in Vietnam, and a rising counterculture were challenging the very foundations of American society. And Jean Seberg, the girl from Iowa who once sent her allowance to the NAACP, was paying close attention. Jean's political awakening was not a whim. It was the natural extension of the empathy that had always defined her. She had seen injustice up close, even within her own industry. She felt a growing disillusionment with the superficiality of Hollywood and a deep need to connect her life to something more meaningful. She used her money to support causes she believed in, quietly at first, then with increasing conviction. She gave generously to the NAACP and supported schools for Native American children, a cause also championed by her friend, Marlon Brando. In the late 1960s, her attention and support turned towards one of the most controversial and formidable groups to emerge from the era, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Founded in Oakland by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, the Panthers were a complex and revolutionary organization. To J. Edgar Hoover's FBI and much of white America, they were a dangerous Marxist black nationalist threat who promoted violence. To many in the black community, they were heroes and protectors. They instituted popular social programs like free breakfast for children and community health clinics, while also openly carrying weapons and monitoring the police to combat brutality, an act of defiance that made them a prime target for law enforcement. Jean was drawn to their courage and their message of black empowerment. From her vantage point in Europe, she saw them as being on the front lines of a necessary revolution. Her involvement became significant. She gave them over $10,000, a very substantial sum at the time, which helped fund their breakfast programs and legal defense funds. She wasn't just a distant benefactor. She hosted fundraisers at her home in Los Angeles, using her celebrity status to bring attention and money to their cause. She also became personally involved, forming a close friendship, which by some accounts became a romantic relationship with a charismatic Panther activist named Hakeem Jamal. Jamal, a cousin of Malcolm X, was a prominent and articulate voice in the movement. This personal connection deepened her commitment. To Jean, this was a simple matter of human decency and justice. She was using her fame and her privilege to aid a community fighting for its basic rights and dignity. But to J. Edgar Hoover, the aging, paranoid, and immensely powerful director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Jean Seberg's actions were an unforgivable transgression. A beautiful, popular white movie star, an American icon, lending her name, her money, and her legitimacy to the Black Panthers was a public relations nightmare. In Hoover's black and white world of patriots and subversives, she had crossed a line, and he had the perfect secret weapon to deal with people who crossed that line. A clandestine, illegal program of sabotage and psychological warfare known as COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO, short for the Counterintelligence Program, was J. Edgar Hoover's shadow army, against dissent. Operating from the 1950s to the early 1970s, its official goal was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize organizations the FBI considered a threat to national security. In practice, it was a program of dirty tricks on a massive scale. Its targets included the Communist Party, anti-Vietnam War protesters, student activists, and most aggressively of all, black leaders and civil rights groups, including Martin Luther King Jr. and the Black Panthers. COINTELPRO's tactics were not about enforcing laws, they were about destroying lives. Agents forged letters to sow discord, planted spies to incite violence, used illegal wiretaps, and, most effectively, weaponized the media to spread lies and propaganda. In early 1970, Jean Seberg, pregnant with her second child, became a top priority for COINTELPRO. The Los Angeles FBI field office drafted a memo and sent it directly to Hoover in Washington, seeking permission to launch a smear campaign against her. The memo, now declassified, lays out the plan with a chilling bureaucratic coldness. They would fabricate a piece of gossip and leak it to a prominent Hollywood columnist. The stated goal, in the FBI's own words, was to cause her embarrassment and serve to cheapen her image with the general public. The memo went on to say, with a stunning lack of humanity, that because Seberg was pregnant, the attack could cause her to think twice about future contributions to such causes. The lie they crafted was particularly venomous, designed to be as psychologically damaging as possible by playing on the most potent racist anxieties of the era. The memo proposed spreading a rumor that the baby Jean was carrying was not her husband Romain Gary's, but had been fathered by a high-ranking member of the Black Panther Party. Hoover, seeing the memo, personally approved the operation. He sent it back to the L.A. office with a handwritten note scrawled at the bottom. "Let's do it." The FBI funneled their poison to a Los Angeles Times gossip columnist named Joyce Haber. On May 19, 1970, she printed a thinly veiled item in her column. Without naming Jean, she alluded to Miss A, a prominent white actress active in prowl and growl causes, who was expecting. Haber winked to her readers that Papa is a militant. The seed was planted. A few weeks later, Newsweek magazine, a major national publication, threw away all pretense of subtlety. It named Jean Seberg outright and repeated the lie that the father of her unborn child was a Black Panther. The story exploded. It was picked up by newspapers and magazines all around the world. Imagine Jean, 7 months pregnant, already in a fragile emotional state, seeing these headlines. The shock, the humiliation, and the stress were overwhelming. She went into premature labor. On August 23, 1970, in Geneva, she gave birth to a baby girl, Nina Hart Gary. The baby was tiny, weighing only 4 pounds. 2 days later, her heart stopped. She was dead. The FBI had gotten its wish. They had caused her embarrassment. They had cheapened her image, but they had done so much more. They had, in all likelihood, killed her child. What happened next is one of the most haunting and desperate acts in this entire tragedy. Jean and Romain Gary flew the tiny body of their daughter back to her hometown of Marshalltown, Iowa, for burial. Consumed by a grief so profound it bordered on madness, and possessed by a frantic need to expose the lie that had destroyed her, Jean made a decision that speaks to the depth of her trauma. She demanded an open casket funeral. She wanted the world, and specifically the press that had so casually printed the slander, to see her daughter, to see the baby's pale white skin, to see with their own eyes the physical proof that the vicious rumor was a lie. Over 100 reporters and photographers descended on the small Iowa town. They crowded into the funeral home and saw the tiny, pale infant in her small white coffin. They saw a mother utterly destroyed by grief, her face a mask of anguish. Romain Gary would later write about it with pure, unadulterated fury. He said, "The slander of 1970 in the American press, whose authors were none other than the FBI, was what struck the first blow. From this moment on, she became psychotic. She couldn't get over it. All the people who saw her at the time know it. She was destroyed." He was right. Something inside Jean broke that day in that Iowa funeral home, and it never, ever healed. The FBI, their mission accomplished, did not stop. Their surveillance continued. They logged her phone calls, tracked her movements, and followed her across Europe. This wasn't just political persecution anymore. It was a relentless psychological haunting. Jean descended into a terrifying spiral of paranoia, depression, and acute mental illness. The ultimate tragedy was that her paranoia was completely justified. They were watching her. Her phones were tapped. The footsteps she heard behind her were real. But her very real fears were dismissed by friends and doctors as delusions, as symptoms of a deteriorating mind. She was trapped in a nightmare where her sanity was questioned for believing a truth no one else could see. She was in and out of psychiatric hospitals. Her marriage to Gary crumbled under the strain. Her once bright career faltered. The luminous, confident star of Breathless was gone, replaced by a frightened, fragile woman who felt she was being hunted. Her friends watched, helpless, as she disintegrated. A close friend, the director Nicholas Gessner, recalled how she would check into hotels under a false name, convinced the FBI was in the next room. He said she wasn't crazy, she was scared. The problem is, if you're scared long enough, you look crazy to other people. The deepest scar, the one that never stopped bleeding, was the death of her daughter Nina. It became the central organizing trauma of her life. Every year, on August 25th, the anniversary of Nina's death, Jean would attempt suicide. It became a horrifying ritual of grief, a desperate attempt to join the daughter she had lost. She was hospitalized again and again, pulled back from the brink, only to live another year in torment until the anniversary came around again. For 9 long years, she lived in this state of perpetual twilight, a ghost of her former self, haunted by what had been done to her. In late August of 1979, just after the 9th anniversary of Nina's death, she vanished from her Paris apartment. For 10 days, no one knew where she was. Her son Diego, Romain Gary, and her friends were frantic. On September 8th, a resident on a quiet side street in a wealthy Paris neighborhood noticed a strange smell coming from a white Renault that had been parked there for days. Inside, police found the body of Jean Seberg. She was 40 years old. She was wrapped in a blanket in the back seat. Beside her was an empty bottle of barbiturates and a short suicide note addressed to her son. It read simply, "Forgive me. I can no longer live with my nerves." The police ruled it a probable suicide, but even in death, troubling questions lingered. The autopsy revealed a massive, lethal overdose of barbiturates, more than 10 times the fatal dose, but it also showed a blood alcohol level so high, over twice the legal driving limit, that she would have been in a comatose state, physically incapable of climbing into the back seat of her car and wrapping herself neatly in a blanket. And strangely, no empty alcohol bottles were found in or near the car. Romain Gary was immediately convinced that she had not been alone when she died. He believed she had been driven to it, or worse. A year and a half after Jean's death, Romain Gary held a press conference. He was a man hollowed out by grief, but his voice burned with a cold, clear rage. He wanted the world to know who he held responsible. He stated point blank that his wife's long mental decline and eventual death were the direct result of the FBI's COINTELPRO campaign. He blamed them for the permanent state of terror they had inflicted upon her and for the death of their child, the event from which, he said, she never recovered. His accusations might have been dismissed as the anguished ramblings of a grieving husband. But just a few months before Jean's death, the truth had finally started to surface. Thanks to Freedom of Information Act lawsuits filed by investigative journalists in the wake of the Watergate scandal, the FBI was forced to release thousands of pages of its secret COINTELPRO files. And there it was. The memo detailing the plan to neutralize Jean Seberg was there in black and white for all the world to see. In September 1979, just after her body was found, the Los Angeles Times ran a story with the headline, "FBI admits spreading lies about Jean Seberg." The vindication was absolute and absolutely devastating. Her paranoia had not been paranoia at all. It was the sober truth, but it came too late to save her. The story has one final heartbreaking postscript. In December 1980, a year after he had publicly blamed the FBI for Jean's death, Romain Gary, the brilliant writer, the war hero, the man who had so fiercely defended her memory, died by suicide. He left a note making it clear his decision was not about Jean. "No connection with Jean Seberg," he wrote. "Aficionados of broken hearts are requested to apply elsewhere." He had simply decided his work was done. But it's impossible not to see their two tragic ends as inextricably linked. Two brilliant, complicated lights extinguished by a world that had become too dark. So why does this story still matter so deeply, decades after the fact? It matters because it is one of the most chilling and personal cautionary tales about the abuse of unaccountable power. It reveals in intimate detail how a government agency, created to protect its citizens, can be secretly weaponized to destroy them for their political beliefs. Jean Seberg committed no crime. Her only offense was her conscience. She dared to use her fame and her fortune to support a cause that the establishment found threatening, and for that, she was systematically dismantled, her reputation ruined, her mental health shattered, and her life cut short. Her story also forces us to look at the toxic intersection of celebrity, activism, and the media. The FBI didn't need to break down her door or arrest her. They just had to whisper a well-crafted lie to the right person. A gossip columnist in a national magazine became willing or perhaps just negligent tools in a state-sponsored character assassination. It's a stark reminder of the power of narrative, of how easily truth can be corrupted, and how words printed on a page can have the same force as a physical blow. But to remember Jean Seberg only as a victim is to do her a final injustice. It's to let J. Edgar Hoover and his anonymous agents have the last word. We must also remember her for her courage. In an era when it was easy and profitable to look away, she took a stand. She saw injustice and refused to be silent. She put her money, her career, and ultimately her life on the line for what she believed in. She was flawed, she was complicated, she was fragile, but she was also incredibly brave. In the end, we are left with those two irreconcilable images: the vibrant, free-spirited girl on the Champs-Élysées, the face of a cinematic revolution, a symbol of hope and modernity, and the hunted, broken woman found wrapped in a blanket in a parked car, a casualty of a secret war she never fully understood until it was too late. Her life is a testament to how fragile our own lives, our reputations, and our sanity can be. It shows how the weight of a secret persecution, of being gaslighted by your own government, can become too heavy for any single person to bear. The movie camera loved Jean Seberg. It captured her light, her beauty, her unique and restless spirit. But it was a different kind of lens, a hidden one, the cold, unblinking eye of surveillance held by unseen hands in a distant office that ultimately sealed her fate. And her story is a profound, heartbreaking reminder that the most dangerous ghosts are sometimes the ones that are terrifyingly chill. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.